Hey everyone, thanks for joining us for another Candid Labs. Today, we're going to be talking about behind the scenes of a workflow of a $1 billion loan originator. I'm Garrett, one of the founders of Candid and one of the chief designers. I wanted to walk you through today what a workflow looks like for top producing loan originators, from front end sales to fulfillment, and then from fulfillment to post closing or client retention. Before we did that, I want to show you a little chart to give you some historical uh, evidence here. Here we go. This is the dashboard inside of Candid, one of the standard ones that comes with it. But if we go over to the lifetime view, you can see this goes back 10 years now. And take you through a quick journey of volume jumps here. So you can see in 2016, 18 million was a total production that I did as a loan originator. And then from 2016, 2017, a nice jump, a 52 million, 52 to 63, almost doubled in 2019 to 123, doubled almost again in 2020, most likely thanks to COVID. Hit the peak of the COVID years and those 3% interest rates to 268 million in 2021, coming off of COVID and then stabilizing around 100, 104, on track for 120, maybe 130 million this year. So what does that mean from a lifetime funding perspective at about 1.3 billion over my career as a loan originator? Another interesting angle to look at is when I got started back in 2016, average loan amount was 280,000. And the primary market here is Nashville, Tennessee. And then over the years, you can see that's grown to 280. We're at 450,000 average loan amount 4 years ago, stabilized coming off of COVID, and then nice jump even this year. Average loan amount 627,000. For Tennessee, it's pretty fantastic. If that was California, that'd probably be average. So larger loan amounts certainly help with the volume as well. But what I want to take you through today is the workflow behind that. What a lot of loan officers don't realize is you're going to hit different ceilings along the way as your volume grows. You're going to have different problems. And so expecting those, anticipating those, and navigating through those is really important. The first one is actually this really good volume between 0 and we'll say 20 million. When you're doing that type of volume as a loan officer, you're typically working by yourself. So you'll have likely a processor, but by yourself, I mean, there's no one technically dedicated to you. You don't have a loan officer assistant, typically wouldn't recommend one. No juniors, typically no dedicated processors either. So that range is quite sustainable. And what about 95% of loan officers do today? Maybe even up to about 97%. But as you're thinking about growing and establishing a set workflow, a set team, the first, we'll say, barrier that you'll hit is typically between this 18 and 52, maybe even up to 60 million range. I remember my largest month as a single loan officer, no dedicated staff, was about 3 million. And that was pretty miserable. I was working long hours, doing everything, going out, meeting with potential referral partners, onboarding new prospects as they came on, evaluating applications, pre-approving, pre-qualifying, following up once someone was under contract, going through that process, etc. So I was doing it all, and my biggest month there was about 3 million, but definitely not sustainable. So once you're at about 15 to 25 million range, 100% want to think about bringing on dedicated staff. The obvious question that we get a lot is who or what should they be doing? And it's pretty simple. You want to break apart your workflow and look at what you enjoy doing versus what you hate doing. And there's really two options there. There's really the front end sales, kind of business development type of role, which is what a lot of loan officers are good at. And then there's what I'll call the sort of back end in the weeds with the details, the follow-ups, making sure everything closes smoothly, fulfillment, sort of operations type of role. And we won't focus on the second one today because most loan officers are really good at the first one. And so it's kind of an easy question to determine what you don't enjoy doing. And that is being in the weeds of fulfillment and operations. And so from the 18 to 52 million jump for me, I brought on my first dedicated team and they did what I did not like doing, which was once someone was under contract, I went through fees and rates, closing costs, etc., and got their buy-in, got the application signed, and then I would typically order the appraisal myself, or I'd hand it off to this new person I hired, and they would take it from that point all the way to closing. um, when you're thinking about, it's worth noting, when you're thinking about hiring people, this is typically where things break down and quickly because the natural tendency is to hire someone like you. The other natural tendency is to hire friends or family. And I think all of those are probably bad decisions. Certainly the last two. If you want to run a business, then you want to hire the absolute best person for the position. And when you're thinking about who to hire, the natural tendency is to hire someone like you, right? Because you have a lot in common, it's easy to work with them, et cetera. More times than not, believe it or not, you would want to hire someone who's not like you, which seems awkward and counterintuitive, but it typically is the right decision. In the example where you have a loan officer who's really good at sales and outreach and business development, and building relationships and onboarding new leads and converting those to pre-approved borrowers, that's a pretty different set of criteria who you're looking for in someone than someone who's really good with analyzing bank statements, following up on items needed, and getting people close. Two different, pretty different personality types. And so, as you're thinking about hiring that first person, you want to, and let's assume that you're going to hire for that back end position. Then you want to hire someone who's extremely analytical, who is really good with details, really good with hitting dates, closing dates, CD dates, that kind of thing. And someone who's not really that great at all at outbound calling, business developing, building relationships necessarily. The other thing that you want to hire for is um, less knowledge and more skill. The last time I checked, I think it's still true to this day, there is no college degree for mortgages. Meaning everyone in the mortgage industry learns by doing, by watching others, by having mentors, by experiencing. And so it's very easy, or a lot easier, I should say, to train and give people knowledge. It's impossible or really difficult to give them skills. Showing up on time, treating customers and referral partners really, really well, having a passion to help others, especially those buying or refinancing a home. Those are things that are difficult to train for, but it's really easy to train for knowledge. So when you're thinking about hiring your first hire, hire for skills and less for knowledge. And most things, if not all, in the mortgage space can be learned. My first hire, his name was Jimmy. He had zero mortgage experience, but he was a great guy and cared a lot about people. And that was my first hire. My second hire was almost identical to that. His name was John. And almost 10 years later, we still work together. And he loves working with people, fantastic with people. Um, really cares a lot, puts a lot of energy into providing, into doing a really good job. And both John and Jimmy had zero mortgage experience. And today, fast forward, I would say they likely know more than me about mortgages than even I do. So hire for talent. Don't worry about knowledge. Knowledge can be learned. This jump from 18 to 52 million, I hired my first person, and their job was to take everyone, typically from signed application all the way to closing. And I still use the same mantra today that I used back then. Their primary job was to make clients forget I exist. If they were doing a really, really great job, the client no longer cared if I existed or not because they were being taken such great care of. The second hire is going to be, if you hired for back end, and the second hire is going to be hiring for the front end. This would be someone who can answer the call for you. This would be someone who can take an application. This would be someone who can pre-approve. And maybe not at first, but ultimately, this would be someone who can talk rate and fees, get someone to sign a mortgage application, collect documents, and hand them off to the back end person. That does not happen overnight. In fact, what I just said scared the heck out of a lot of loan officers because a loan officer without help, or maybe a loan officer with part-time help, or just loan officers in general, have a really hard time with letting go. The reality is that home buyers and homeowners, um, they, as long as they're being taken care of, don't particularly care who's taking care of them. In fact, I would go a step further than that and say that most loan officers put too much of their time and energy and effort thinking that they are needed when they are not. And so the ultimate goal, especially as you're thinking about going from 50 to 100 million or beyond, the ultimate goal is for a referral partner to refer you a client, email, phone, text, doesn't matter. That referral to come in, someone on your team be able to engage with them immediately, far faster than you could because you're busy, and be able to pre-approve them, walk them through the process, share and articulate your values and why you do what you do, follow up with them once they are pre-approved to make sure that they're staying informed and educated, you're staying in front of them as they're making offers, making sure they have all the information they need to confidently do that, and then ultimately hand that referral to that backend person that you hired so that they can create a repeatable, scalable home closing experience. And you'll notice what I didn't ever say is anyone handed them to you as a loan officer. In fact, you're completely out of it. That's the ultimate goal. But there are baby steps along the way where it takes hiring the right person, making sure they have the right training, they know the right standards, and then you allow them to execute and yes, sometimes even fail so that they can continue to learn, so that they continue to execute with those standards in place. And ultimately with the goal of them making clients forget that you as a loan officer even exists. As far as the workflow goes, you've got to have the right people in place, the right team. You have to have the right system in place as well. You have to have that team centered around something. A lot of loan officers use a spreadsheet. A loan officer that I just talked to not long ago, he uses Monday.com, which is like a fancy spreadsheet, but he's hitting a ceiling with spreadsheets. He was even hitting the ceiling with Monday.com. And so as you're thinking about as a loan officer, as you're thinking about your business, another sort of ceiling that you'll hit is what I call a systems ceiling. A spreadsheet can only carry you so far. And so you need to be thinking not only about your systems in terms of what you have today, but what would a system look like if I was doing double or triple or quadruple the volume that I'm doing? Is what I have in place today able to sustain that kind of volume? Is it able to support a growing team? And um, when we say growing team, when in 2020, 2021, these 2 years, I was doing 200 plus million a year. You would think, wow, that was probably a team of like 10 people or maybe 20. Four people did that kind of volume. And which is typically unheard of, a four-person team doing 270 million a year. Excuse me. But the reason that we're able to sustain that kind of volume without double or quadrupling our number of people on our team is because we had the right workflow, the right processes in place. We relied heavily on automation to take care of the stuff that didn't need us and was time intensive. And we relied heavily on what we were good at to get in, build those relationships with automation is not good at, and create a great, scalable, repeatable home financing experience. So In the workflow of your top producing loan officers, what they do is they break it down into really three categories. First is all things sales. In Candid, we call that prospects. And a prospect is where your top loan originator should be spending 95% of their day. If you're a loan originator spending any more of your day outside of prospects, then you've got a workflow issue that needs to be addressed. Prospect starts the first moment you receive a referral. Doesn't matter how you receive them. Um, if it's by Candid's point of sale, it's automatically in the system through the Candid website. It automatically gets put created in your as a prospect in your system. If it's a realtor referral to the referral portal, same thing, automatically created. But there are situations where you'll get a referral and that referral will need to be entered manually. Think text message on your personal mobile device. And so in that situation, no matter what, the first thing the top loan officers are doing anytime they get a referral is they've got to put it in the system. This is vital to sealing any leaks in that top of funnel. Um, Once the prospect is in the system, then it's a matter of when you assign it to your teammate, not really if. So back in the sort of steps that I was talking about earlier, if we open up a referral here that or prospect here, then you'll notice that there's no loan officer one assigned. Completely fine. In fact, you might not assign a loan officer one until you convert this prospect into what we call a deal, which is fulfillment focus. That's in the scenario where you have one person and they're only working on the back end to create a great home financing experience after the application's been signed. But the goal is over time to be able to assign an LOA one sooner and sooner and sooner and sooner until a lot of prospects may come in and there's already an LOA assigned immediately. In fact, inside of Candid, you can do that automatically by going to, I'll take a random account here, but by going to the account and actually creating a preferred LOA, a preferred LOA in that account. What you're doing there is you're creating a repeatable, scalable, consistent experience for each referral partner, right? Because as your team grows, you don't just have one person on the front end, one person on the back end. Now you might have two people on the front end, two people on the back end. As that grows, what you want to do for your referral partners is create consistency with them. They might even tell you, hey, I love working with John as my LOA. Fantastic. Robbie Drimmer, who's a realtor, will now automatically be assigned John as the LOA anytime one of Robbie's clients gets created as a prospect. And that's intentional. You want to create that consistent experience because Robbie said he loves working with John, and therefore John will always be Robbie's LOA. So the goal with the hierarchy, the team hierarchy, is of course there's always a loan officer in it to you, but to be able to assign that loan officer, assistant, or that loan partner as quick as you can. And over time, the goal is if you ever find yourself assigning them consistently over a 6 or 12 or 18-month period, let's say you assign them consistently at a specific point in your workflow, then just think to yourself, hey, I need to keep working towards the goal of assigning them sooner and sooner and sooner. And as part of the workflow, once the prospect is created and your LOA one is assigned, then you want to work that prospect through the different stages. New contacted items needed are three pretty standard stages. Yours might look a little bit different and say something a little bit different, but the idea is the same. With every prospect that comes in, the goal is to get them pre-qualified or pre-approved and then stay in front of them. What every top loan originator is doing, especially with teams, is they are making sure that when they assign a loan officer assistant, that loan officer assistant then owns the file. You have to give them 100% ownership because there needs to be 100% clarity along the lines of whose responsibility is this prospect. And so you're assigning the loan officer assistant. making sure that they know they now own that prospect and their job is to continue to push those stages forward. Pre-approved typically sticks around for 30, 60, 90 plus days, and then ultimately sending out those disclosures once they're under contract. Another breakdown in a workflow is making sure that you have clear guidelines around what is sales and what is fulfillment. And the clearer that line is drawn, the better for everyone, the more clarity everyone has. I typically recommend drawing the line after disclosures are signed. And the reason is pretty simple. A really good loan officer or loan officer assistant or loan partner, their entire job is to build trust and to build that relationship all the way up to a pivotal point when in the home financing journey of getting the mortgage application signed. There's an inherent level of trust that's built up. And when someone is signing a mortgage application, that trust is being executed on. And so I've seen some people draw the sales line before the application, just before the application is sent out and signed. I think that's a mistake because it's going to create scenarios where someone goes under contract, they have a great experience with whomever they've been working with on your team, and then they're handed off to what they feel like is a complete stranger. Not a complete stranger to you, but you have to think about everything from the borrower standpoint. They're introduced to someone new that they likely have not spoken with before. And then that new person is asking them to sign 60 pages worth of legally binding-ish documents. That's pretty scary. And so put yourself in those shoes. Who would you rather walk through that experience with? Someone that you've spent weeks, months, maybe even years getting to know, or someone who's completely new that you have not met yet. So that's why I say I think it's a wise decision to place the mortgage application signing experience in the sales bucket. Once the application's been signed, then it's up to you whether you require all of the documents to convert it to a deal or simply draw the line there and say, mortgage application's been signed. Now we're going to gather documents, hand that off to a new person. One other note with every great workflow that I've ever seen, the general guideline is the less people who interact with the borrower, the better. So I've seen some workflows that think Rocket Mortgage actually. Rocket Mortgage is an extreme example. But Rocket Mortgage, if you go through their process, you may speak to up to 7 different people, right? It's very sort of a Ford Motor Company conveyor belt type of mortgage experience. I think that's a mistake because it takes away from the personal nature of our job. Our job ultimately is relationship and trust building. We happen to do mortgages as part of that. But if you don't nail the first part, you're going to struggle with the second. And so with when you come to sort of a fork in the road to decide, should we introduce a third person or a fourth person or fifth person on our team, always think about it from the perspective of the borrower experience, your own perspective. Would you rather talk with less people or more people to get a mortgage? And a large majority of the time, the answer is less. So a workflow where the loan officer interacts with the borrower at first, and then they hand them off to loan officer one, I think is fine. That loan officer one may hand them off to loan officer two. I think that is fine as well. I think there's a little bit of redundancy there that could be addressed. But I would say max 3 people is who you want to connect with the borrower. That loan officer two could be a hybrid processor, or it could be a full-on processor. The titles are not set in stone. But what you don't want to happen is your borrower is speaking to more and more and more people. Less is better because we're in the relationship building business. So the ultimate setup that you can work towards is 2 people. Loan officer's not even involved. Instead, referral comes to the door, prospects created, LOA one was signed, they take it until they eventually hand it off to that LOA two or hybrid processor or processor role. That processor, hybrid processor, LOA two gets them to closing, done. You have a lot of people working behind the scenes, but I'm talking about who's interacting directly with the borrower. Now, we've been talking about prospects all of this time. Once a borrower or homeowner is signed their application, which I recommend, perhaps a little bit after that, but not much, you want to convert that prospect. Of course, if you have the LOS integration, it's automatically done for you. But the second part of the top producers pipeline is focused on fulfillment. Now, excuse me. Fulfillment should be less than 5% of the loan officer's world. Loan officer's primary function is sales. It's relationship building, it's referral partner, engagements, it's prospecting, it's business development, it's all those things. A great team behind a loan officer will keep them out of the deal object or the fulfillment pipeline a vast majority of the time. In fact, 100% of the time would be the goal. The other thing to mention about deal is, especially with an LOS integration, all of the stages and the dates, appraisal ordered, appraisal received, CD signed, etc., are automated. So you don't need to worry about updating any of the fields. A lot more important with the prospect journey, because sales journeys are so ambiguous, fulfillment's pretty set in stone with what happens and when along that journey. But as part of the workflow, we're past sales. We've moved full on into fulfillment. And the number one objective of the deal object is to create a repeatable, scalable, enjoyable home financing experience where all of the parties are constantly communicated with exactly where things are and where they're going next. As you're working your way through the deal stages, that automatically happens in Candid. So it's pretty common in the mortgage space to have like Tuesday updates. And what that looks like is the loan officer or someone on their team picks up the phone, they call down all the referral partners who have sent them something, who's in the deal object, and they give them an update on the file. That does not scale. I'm not actually not a big fan of that. It works up to about 50 million, but at some point it simply doesn't scale. There's enough time in the day to call everyone. The other side of that coin is to put yourself in the referral partner's position. As a realtor, let's say you have 15 closings this month. That would be a lot of closings for a realtor, but you always think it's scale. So let's say as a realtor, you have double digit closings each month. Do you want to call 15? Do you want that many calls to keep you updated on each of those closings? Of course not. The answer is no. So you can't possibly keep track of that. Instead, think about the same thing at scale for realtors. What would be the optimal way to keep them updated? Provide them with a pipeline they can look at 24/7, keep them updated by text. But I would stay away from phone calls at scale just because it simply doesn't work. Now, in the deal world, luckily, thankfully, pre-built out of the box with Candid comes all of these stage updates for the borrower, the co-borrower, the buyer's agent assistant, the listing agent assistant, title, and homeowner's insurance. So again, going back to how in the world would you close $250 million a year in volume with 4 people? Impossible if you're trying to call everyone I just mentioned for every file you're just closing. So typically when your volume spikes, that falls through the cracks, but very scalable and very doable if you click a button and the communication is done, or your LOS automatically updates the stage and that communication is done for you. That's how you can scale volume without making the experience suffer, which is a very natural tendency, especially if rates drop a little bit, you get 6 or 7 extra refinances, and all of a sudden your service level drops. How do you scale and maintain that? Through best practices around communication and automating it. Now, the last part of the workflow for a loan officer who is looking to do more volume and continue to grow is probably the most overlooked, and that is client retention. The number one area that falls off and fails, especially as volume picks up, is everything that's supposed to happen, but simply doesn't after closing. When that fails, and let's say volume picks up, eventually volume tapers off, and all of a sudden you go into the roller coaster mode of having a great month, having a terrible month, having a great month, having a terrible month. And that's because there's activities, especially with client retention aren't being consistently done. And so, as part of a workflow, and I would certainly count this for top producing loan originators, as part of their workflow, client retention activities need to be 100% consistent. The reality is making sure every client receives their opportunity to complete an annual mortgage review is just impossible, even with the largest teams out there. In fact, and one of our newest users, Shant Benosian, who's the number one loan officer in the country, clears $1 billion every year in volume. They just stopped doing annual mortgage review. They didn't have the capacity to do that. But a huge opportunity. And think about client retention across the board and at scale. It's not just annual mortgage reviews, it's every birthday, every anniversary, every home equity update, home value reports. All of these things need to be happening 100% consistent because it's so tough to do that and not have a team of 100 people. Candid has automated everything I just mentioned and more. So when you place a client in closed status under the deal, it becomes the third and final workflow. It becomes client retention. And the goal of client retention is to stay in front of every borrower and co-borrower, yes, but also every buyer's agent you've ever worked with, every listing agent you've ever worked with, CPAs and financial planners, all of those parties at scale. And with the two last categories, typically your loan officer is not going to put in, your CPA and financial planner information. Just not going to happen. Thankfully, Candid's mortgage application does that for them. So it'll ask people as part of the mortgage application experience if they use a CPA or financial planner, and they willingly place that information in there. That becomes part of client retention, and I think an increasingly important part because it scales the different stools that can bring in business and referral partners. CPA and financial planners aren't going to be as consistent as realtors. They're still an important part, especially when rates drop and their clients need cash out refinance opportunities. So client retention is the third and final piece of the workflow that top producing loan officers are paying a lot of attention to. And I'll give you a stat here that I just saw recently the other day that was really mind blowing. In April of 2026, 2 months ago, if I scroll over this bar right here, you can see that 62.48% of the entire closing, $6.7 million of this particular month's closing, came from repeat purchase clients. And that is an example of the power of consistency and time and the client retention cloud that Candid is offering because it keeps the loan officer and their team in front of every client after closing, including buyers agents and listing agents and CPAs and financial planners. And so one of the biggest struggles when you're thinking about growing business is, of course, the time capacity issue, meaning there's only a certain amount of hours in a day. What do I do with that? There's hours. And there's a good enough chunk of realtors who won't send a loan officer business unless they take them out to lunch once a month or so. And so this is a great answer to that because, again, you can only take so many realtors out to lunch every month. That strategy doesn't succeed at scale. Instead of using that strategy, rely on great execution, rely on never letting a borrower, listing agent, buyer's agent, CPA, financial planner forget about you after closing, and do it in a way that is a value add every time. Meaning, if a client completes your annual mortgage review, then Candid is automatically providing some of those responses to the buyer's agent. That's a value add. When your client has a birthday, 5 days before every birthday, the buyer's agent gets a heads up. If your client says, hey, I'm moving in the next 12 months, guess what? Your referral partner gets a heads up. You have a listing opportunity alert, all automated and all value adds after closing to produce repeat purchase business over and over again. In the month of April 2026, of that 62.48 of repeat purchase clients, that was just purchase clients. That doesn't include refinances. So the actual repeat clients for this month is actually beyond 63% and a very achievable number given the automated client retention cloud at scale and of course multiplied by time. Mhm. So in review, a great workflow has to be centered around a great system and great people and the right people, making sure that we're hiring the right people for the role that we want them in, making sure we're giving them great training. And then a great workflow also has to include three distinct phases: sales, fulfillment, and client retention, and a team that's dialed into each, clear objectives, clear guidelines for what each stage means and what the responsibilities and expectations are for each of those buckets in the workflow. Shoot me an email, Garrett at candid.inc, with any questions, and we will see you next time.